Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving into a fascinating paper titled InfiniteICL, Breaking the Limit of Context Window Size. It's a bold claim, and I think it warrants a deep dive. Who wants to kick us off with their initial thoughts? Okay, so we've got a spectrum of opinions. Let's dig into the paper itself a bit. As I understand it, they're proposing a system that circumvents the traditional context window limitations by essentially externalizing the context. It's not all loaded into memory at once. It's more like a giant, addressable database that the model can query as needed.
Right? Almost like an infinitely large external hard drive for the model's attention. But how does it decide what to query? That's the critical question. If it's just randomly grabbing snippets, it's not going to be very useful. There has to be some intelligent mechanism for selecting the relevant information from that vast sea of data.
Exactly. And that's where I think the current deep learning paradigm falls short. It's all about statistical correlations, but it lacks a real understanding of the underlying structure of the information. You can't just throw more data at a problem and expect it to magically solve itself. You need to have some kind of knowledge representation and reasoning mechanism built in.
I think the querying is the most important. So, the querying mechanism is going to have to translate the query coordinate system of the algorithm into that large context window. If they have to build the context window first, they will run into the same memory issue they already have. That's why I think understanding how the model translates between coordinate systems is very important.
Yes, and that also brings in my biggest question. How much computational cost are we adding here? Accessing an external database for every single token generation seems incredibly expensive. Are they using some kind of caching mechanism, or are they relying on specialized hardware to speed things up?
From what I gather, they are using caching, but it's a dynamic caching strategy. The model learns which parts of the context are most likely to be relevant in the future and prioritizes caching those. It's a bit like how our brains prioritize certain memories based on their frequency of use or emotional salience.
See, that's interesting, but it also introduces a potential bias. If the model is only caching what it already knows is important, it might miss out on novel connections and insights that could be gained from exploring less familiar parts of the context.
That's the exploration-exploitation trade-off, right? The model needs to balance exploiting its existing knowledge with exploring new possibilities. It's like a kid learning to ride a bike. You have to try new positions sometimes to get better balance and coordination.
Yeah, and thinking about that, I wonder if this external context window approach could actually help with mitigating some of the biases we see in current LLMs. If the model has access to a truly diverse and representative dataset in its external context, it might be less likely to fall into stereotypical patterns of thinking.
That's a compelling point. Otto, imagine a medical diagnosis AI that has access to the entire medical literature, including rare case studies and anecdotal evidence. It could potentially identify patterns and make diagnoses that a human doctor might miss simply due to the limitations of their own experience. Thinking about that from a neuroscience perspective, it reminds me of how different brain regions collaborate to process information, with each region contributing its own specialized knowledge.
That ethical dilemma is a great example. To solve that, the system needs to translate the abstract concepts of ethics into a solvable space. It's going to need to create a spatiotemporal model of consequences. The output will then also have to be transformed back into ethical recommendations. So, what coordinate transform algorithm will the system use? Is it even possible to translate ethics in such a way without bias?
Well, and that's exactly why I think scaling up deep learning is still a valid path to AGI. Even if the models don't have explicit symbolic representations of knowledge, they can still learn to approximate reasoning through exposure to vast amounts of data. The more data they see, the better they become at identifying subtle patterns and making nuanced judgments. It's like how a human learns to ride a bike. You don't need to understand the physics of balance perfectly. You just need to practice enough to develop the necessary skills.
But isn't that analogy also highlighting the limitations of the purely data-driven approach? A human learns to ride a bike by interacting with the real world, by feeling the forces acting on their body, by making mistakes and learning from them. Current deep learning models are still largely passive observers of data. They don't have that same embodied experience. Could we leverage brain-computer interfaces to give AI systems a more direct experience of the world, allowing them to learn in a more embodied and intuitive way?
That's an interesting thought, combining the vast data with real-world interaction. But still, If the system cannot understand the actual cause and effects, it will be like trying to teach a robot to clean the kitchen. It can learn to pick up the plates and put them in the dishwasher, but it's not going to understand why it's doing it or what the ultimate goal is. And that's why I think we need to focus on neurosymbolic approaches that combine the strengths of deep learning with the structured knowledge representation of symbolic AI. We want it to understand why the plate must be cleaned and what happens if the plate is not cleaned.
I'm still stuck on the coordinate translation. In physics, we use tensors to translate between different coordinate systems. Tensors can represent multidimensional arrays of data and can be transformed to express the same data in different coordinate systems. Is it possible to create a tensor-like structure for AI? That way, the system can learn relationships between different concepts and translate from spatial to time to ethic.
Okay, but even if we could develop such a system, wouldn't it be incredibly complex and computationally expensive? And would it really be necessary? I mean, look at how far we've come with deep learning already. We have models that can generate human quality text, translate languages in real time, and even compose music. Isn't that enough to convince you that we're on the right track?
Those are impressive achievements, absolutely. But I also think it's important to recognize the limitations. Current AI systems are still very brittle and prone to making mistakes that a human would never make. And they lack the common sense reasoning abilities that even a young child possesses. This makes me wonder if we are optimizing the wrong thing. What can we learn from studying how the brain optimizes resources?
Exactly. They're good at mimicking human behavior, but they don't actually understand what they're doing. It's like the famous example of the AI that learned to play chess at a superhuman level, but couldn't figure out how to move the pieces if the board was slightly tilted. We need to move beyond pattern matching and start building systems that can actually understand the world in a meaningful way.
That's true, and the translation of chessboard orientation is another coordinate system that the system needs to translate. To Sarah's point, unless the translation algorithm understands that a chess piece maintains its identity regardless of coordinate location, it will not understand the game.
So, are we saying that current AI will also fail at playing checkers if the board is tilted? That can easily be tested and experimented on.
It probably depends on how the AI was trained. If it was trained on images of tilted chessboards, it might be able to handle it. But if it was only trained on perfectly aligned boards, it would likely struggle. That's the problem with a purely data-driven approach. It's very sensitive to the distribution of the training data. This is where I think neuroscience can offer valuable insights. The brain is incredibly good at generalizing from limited data and adapting to new situations. How does it do that? What are the underlying neural mechanisms that enable this flexibility and robustness?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the answer lies in the brain's ability to represent knowledge in a structured way and to reason about that knowledge using logical inference. The brain isn't just a giant pattern matching machine. It's a complex system of interconnected networks that can perform sophisticated computations.
I suspect the brain might already be doing something like translating between coordinate systems. The vestibular system, for instance, helps us maintain our balance and orientation in space. It's constantly translating information from our inner ear into signals that our brain can use to control our movements. Is there some fundamental algorithm at play here?
Okay, but let's not forget the progress we've made. Current AI can process massive amounts of data. We've only scratched the surface on the amount of data that is available and the compute power available to process it. Maybe there is a critical amount of data where common sense starts to materialize.
It's a compelling vision, but I'm not sure if simply throwing more data at the problem is the right approach. I think we need to be more strategic. We need to focus on developing algorithms that can learn more efficiently and that can generalize better. And that, I believe, requires a deeper understanding of how the brain works. I'm very curious as to how the new Neuralink product will contribute in that regard.
I agree. More data is helpful, but not sufficient. We need to start thinking about how to encode knowledge into these systems in a way that is both flexible and robust. We need to develop algorithms that can reason about the world, not just recognize patterns.
And we need to figure out how to enable these systems to translate between different coordinate systems. Without that, they'll always be limited in their ability to understand the world and to reason about it. A chessboard needs to be a chessboard regardless of the orientation.
Okay, I hear you all. But let's not dismiss the potential of scaling up deep learning. Maybe we need to combine these approaches. Maybe we need to develop hybrid systems that combine the strengths of deep learning with the structured knowledge representation of symbolic AI. Or maybe we need to develop new architectures that are inspired by the brain, but that are also optimized for the unique capabilities of computers.
Exactly. That's where I think the real potential lies. It's not about choosing one approach over another, but about finding ways to combine them in a synergistic way. InfiniteICL could be a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture.
Agreed, a hybrid approach seems like the most promising path forward. We need to find ways to integrate knowledge, representation, and reasoning into these deep learning models. And we need to develop new evaluation metrics that go beyond simple accuracy and that measure things like robustness, explainability, and common sense reasoning ability.
And we need to start thinking about how to enable these systems to translate between different coordinate systems. Maybe we can draw inspiration from physics, or maybe we need to develop entirely new mathematical frameworks.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about future research directions. From my perspective, I'm particularly interested in exploring the role of specific neural pathways and their corresponding computational models in the brain. How can we translate our understanding of these mechanisms into new AI architectures? Specifically, I would like to explore how a neuroscientific understanding of working memory, particularly the role of neural oscillations and synchronicity, can inform the design of context windows in systems like InfiniteICL.
I think a crucial area for future research is developing better evaluation metrics for these systems. We need to move beyond simple task completion and start measuring things like understanding, reasoning, and generalization ability. How can we design benchmarks that truly capture the essence of intelligence? And how can we ensure that these benchmarks are not easily gamed by clever algorithms?
I want to see more research on neurosymbolic AA. How can we develop algorithms that can represent and reason with knowledge in a way that's both flexible and powerful? How can we combine the strengths of deep learning with the structured knowledge representation of symbolic AI? I believe the biggest limitation is in representing the knowledge. We need to find a way to store facts and rules, and we need to find a way for deep learning algorithms to use that knowledge.
I am most curious to see if it is possible to develop a tensor-like mathematical construct to store and manipulate spatiotemporal relationships and relationships between abstract concepts. Such a breakthrough will allow for translation between spatial position, time, and abstract concepts. I think our definition of coordinate translation is too narrow, and that future algorithms will need to translate between many representations.
Those are all fantastic points. It sounds like we all agree that while infinite ICL is an interesting development, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The path to AGI is likely to be long and winding, and it will require a multidisciplinary approach that draws on insights from neuroscience, computer science, mathematics, and many other fields. It will be interesting to see if infinite ICL will stand the test of time. In the meantime, more and better data sets might improve its accuracy. Maybe we need to give that a try before saying it fails.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the field of AI is constantly evolving. New breakthroughs are happening all the time. What seems impossible today may be commonplace tomorrow.
That's true. And it's also important to be critical and to question our assumptions. We need to avoid getting caught up in hype cycles and to focus on developing systems that are truly intelligent, not just superficially impressive.
And we need to keep exploring new ideas and new approaches. The key to unlocking AGI may lie in a completely unexpected direction.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for sharing your insights. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Cognitive Spirals. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into infinite ICL, breaking the limit of context window size. Until next time, keep exploring.